All right, Hurricane Irma's impacts just in the United States was recovering from Hurricane Harvey just a few weeks ago that slammed Texas. Now another one. Hurricane Irma, a Category 5 storm with 285 kilometers per hour winds, is moving quickly off the northern coast of the Dominican Republic. Take a look at this. It is one of the most powerful storms to ever form in the Atlantic. A huge hurricane, Hurricane Irma. The National Hurricane Center says it could be downgraded to a Category 4 storm before it makes landfall in the U.S. state of Florida. Hurricane watches are now in effect for many places in and around that region, including the Bahamas, Cuba, and many Caribbean islands, including USVI, the British Virgin Islands. In fact, Hurricane Irma, one of the most powerful to ever form in the Atlantic this century alone. So far, the death toll stands at 8, but that could quickly grow. The island of St. Martin as well is devastated, including another island, Berbuda. So many places there impacted. This is the projected path. Look at some of the destruction there happening. There are trees down, just quite a messy situation there for many people on that path. In fact, Hurricane Irma battering the Caribbean, reducing some of the islands to rubble, one of the worst storms to ever form. And unfortunately, the worst is yet to come. Here's a report.
Hurricane Irma is wreaking havoc across the Caribbean, causing widespread destruction, reducing buildings to rubble. Rain and high winds hit the French island territory of St. Martin, spelling disaster, destroying everything that came its way. One of the most powerful Atlantic storms in a century, Irma is moving at about 250 kilometers per hour, with an uncertain trajectory. The dual island nation of Antigua and Berbuda have been the worst hit, when 90% of buildings have been destroyed.
Some have lost whole roofs. Some properties have been totally demolished. It is absolutely heart-wrenching. I mean, the infrastructure, the utilities infrastructure was damaged. The physical infrastructure was damaged. You'd recognize, too, that the island is literally underwater. You know that we are threatened now potentially by yet another storm.
French Interior Minister too voiced concern over the mounting death toll.
Alors les destructions sont massives et donc nos premiers efforts sont d'abord de permettre que pendant les prochaines heures les gens puissent continuer à s'alimenter, à avoir de l'eau. Nous faisons acheminer des barges d'eau de manière à pouvoir fournir les deux îles en eau potable.
An alert has been sounded in Florida too. With this, Irma has become the second powerful storm to thrash the US mainland after Harvey in as many weeks, but its precise trajectory remains uncertain. Hurricane Harvey killed more than 60 people and caused damage worth $180 billion when it struck Texas last month. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, joining us on tonight's discussion about Hurricane Irma's impacts, we have photojournalist Joy Bat from Florida. We also have American writer and intelligence officer Glenn Carl from Massachusetts. Plus, we have our correspondent Andy Roskin from Chicago, Illinois. We'll get to all of them in just a minute. Let me first start with Glenn. Glenn, you've seen plenty of hurricanes in the United States. Not the first time something like this is happening. But, you know, they just dealt with Hurricane Harvey. Now another one of the most powerful storms in the Atlantic to ever form. What is the sort of the mood there, given the devastation that we just saw in Texas?
Well, there's concern, as always. These hurricanes come up the islands in the Caribbean, hit the south coast, Florida or Georgia, and then usually dissipate a bit and then come up the east coast. But there has been a response by the governor of Florida, more decisive and strong than almost any I can recall, ordering massive evacuations of hundreds of thousands of people. And then the reports that you are relaying and that we all hear about the devastation in the islands is unlike anything, it seems, that we've experienced. I've been in hurricanes with 110 or maybe 115 mile an hour winds, and which is 175 kilometers an hour. And it's just about impossible to stand up as a robust adult with winds that are gusting to 320 kilometers or 190 miles an hour. It's hard to imagine. I know the islands a bit, and the reports from the governors there and the leaders are that 95% of the structures in Berbuda of all the buildings have been damaged or destroyed. It's quite remarkable.
Glenn, let me also ask you a follow-up question to that. You know, just last week, a few weeks ago, when we saw U.S. President Donald Trump, this was one of his first natural disasters that he had to sort of get on the ground and put a plan into action. And now, yet again, you know, as Florida embraces for this, the path is still a little unclear, but many of the southeastern states in the United States, unfortunately, they are used to these hurricanes, but nothing that is ever as big as this one. I mean, is there any kind of a plan in place? I mean, certainly a lot of government funds that will need to be allocated once it does make landfall in a few days.
Well, for the listeners, it may initially seem surprising when I say that the intelligence community is deeply involved in disasters of this sort, but it is true. When I was working there, and my successors, of course, are responsible for planning the contingencies. One, reporting the likely consequences of dramatic events such as a hurricane, and then working with authorities. It's called FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, I think, for the government response to disasters. And that gets then into issues of intelligence, but also issues of politics and funding, because 80% of the residents in Florida, or Texas rather, who have been affected by the hurricane don't have flood insurance. The government allocation of money, a supplemental bill was passed yesterday for $8 billion or $9 billion. That's probably 1/10 what the costs will be. That leads then into the budgetary discussions and to the long-term planning of how to fund and manage the Emergency Management Association. And you find the irony, which there's no humor in it at all, of the representatives, the senators from Texas, the affected state, and the governor of Florida, another affected state, both Republicans who have opposed any funding for emergency relief to the Northeast and now asking for $100 billion. So that is ironic, and politics can't escape politics even in a hurricane.
Right. All right. Let me bring in our other guests as well to get perspective on the story. We also have Joy Batt joining us from Florida, photojournalist. Joy, thanks for joining us. Let me ask you, it's about to make landfall. I understand you went to the stores. The gas stations are apparently deserted. There's no bread and milk. I mean, the stores, what is it like there in Florida in terms of how people are getting ready for Irma?
The gas stations don't have gas, but they're getting gas coming in. So, you know, you just have to go to several different gas stations to find gas. Water, I had to go to several stores. It took me 2 days to find water. And bread and stuff, I just had to get some English muffins.
Let me also ask you, Joel, you know, Florida is unfortunately used to many of these hurricanes. It's not the first time something like this it isn't anything new. But at the same time, this is one of the most powerful hurricanes that the meteorologists are calling it to form in the Atlantic. I mean, we saw the devastations with Harvey, and now this. I mean, one of my friends, in fact, recently was saying that airlines have also hijacked their prices. I mean, tickets that really wouldn't be, you know, more than a few $100s are now much, much more expensive, sort of trying to turn a quick profit. I mean, what are you picking up there? Is that true? Are you seeing prices perhaps going up?
No, JetBlue is actually running a $99 special one way to get out. If it's a direct flight, it's $99. It's $150 if it's a layover or anything. I don't know about the other airports, but JetBlue's doing has cheap tickets. All
right, what about you guys? What is your plan, your family, your friends? Are you guys going to watch the storm go by? Are you guys going to be there in Florida, or are you all going to drive off? What's the preparation that you guys are doing?
My parents left this morning. Me and Rico are going to stay here, and we have the shutters up. We have plywood on the windows. We have lots of water. I have battery backups, candles, flashlights. I'm going to go get some food later. So we're just going to ride it out.
All right, let me bring Glenn Carl back into the conversation as well. Glenn, we heard some people brave out the storm, some people, escape to other parts. I mean, in fact, the mayor of Houston recently was criticized. Some people said that, he didn't do enough to evacuate people, but he justified himself, saying that it is very difficult to get that many people out of such a big metropolitan city like Houston, and it would clog up the roads. I mean, is there a right procedure or right formula when it comes to evacuations? Because right now it's still too early. Nobody knows. I mean, yes, certainly you want to escape, but how long? And in terms of your experience, what is the right thing to do in situations like this?
My most relevant direct experience with that, one, I have a personal experience which is directly relevant, but then my work actually planning for these evacuations in disasters and then trying to anticipate them so that one doesn't have to evacuate us, I worked on a lot. After 9/11, after the attacks of 9/11, I was in Washington when they occurred, and the city was essentially evacuated. And it was completely paralyzed. It took the whole day for people to leave. The highways were just parking lots, and all of them were going in all directions. So the mayor of Houston is making sensible comments, and it's a problem that I'm not sure anyone has a good solution to, unless you can do this phased over time, an evacuation, which people would not obey. So that is a tough one. I'd like to make the point, go back to my intelligence work, which is, I know it will sound strange, but the job was to try to foresee strategic threats to American interests. But that's just because I work for the United States. It could, if I'd worked for India, it would have been for India. Every country should have an office like this. And for 15 years at least, the intelligence community has been trying to warn, and the national security establishment and the scientific community of the U.S. government has been trying to warn the authorities that the greatest threat, strategic threat to the United States and frankly to the globe, is global warming. Now that's been denied and derided by political opponents who say that is touchy-feely left-wing nonsense and that terrorism is the worst.
Right.
I worked on terrorism. It's not correct. Think of this one storm, $100 billion of damage in one metropolitan area.
Right.
We now have, if you look at the trends of these once-in-a-100-year storms has been going up for 4 decades. They now become regular. This is if not an existential threat, it's one that costs up to in the trillions of dollars of damage that can be addressed if the authorities will listen to experts who have been saying this for 40 years, and that has not proved to be the case.
All right, we'll continue the conversation with both Glenn and Joy in just a bit.